The siren from my car still bleeds red and blue across locker 3117's aluminum door when he leans in close to me, eyes wet under the drizzle in the station parking lot. Take it. It only works with this. A coin, cold, heavier than it should be, drops into my palm like a verdict. I don't have time to ask who minted destiny into its metal. The radio crackles my name. Someone yells, "Evacuate!" The digital clock in the terminal blinks Aero 217, and I slide the coin into the slot. It turns, locks. A short, intimate click, like a secret opening its throat. I breathe in the rust and bleach seeping out. The locker creaks open 3 inches. Inside, a brown envelope tied with a black band, and my badge, photographed, slashed with a blade. The word traitor carved into it. My stomach sinks. At the bottom, a motel key from Highway 19, room 22, taped to a flash drive. Behind me, the man who gave me the coin vanishes into the shuffle of hurried footsteps. I pull out the envelope. A phone rings inside. Reflex makes me answer. A child's voice whispers, "Dad, run!" And then, the hammer of a pistol cocks against the back of my head. I was born in Ohio, in a town so small no one outside the state could point to it on a map. I grew up surrounded by corn silos, tiny churches, and the suffocating sense that the world ended after 3 main streets. My father was a truck driver, a man of few words whose calloused hands told more stories than his mouth ever could, long nights on the road, debts that never seemed to get paid. My mother worked at a rural hospital, scrubbing floors and swallowing her exhaustion so I could at least have the chance to be something different. When I was 10, I learned that promises don't last. My father never came back from a trip. They said it was an accident. To this day, I don't know if it was fate, negligence, or simply the escape of a man who couldn't bear the life he had. I carried that absence like an invisible tattoo, and maybe that's what pushed me toward the badge. I grew up furious at men who disappear, obsessed with being the one who stays. At 18, I joined the police academy. No money for college, no roadmap for the future. I learned to march in step, to shoot without blinking, to follow orders without asking questions. But more than that, I learned how to carry silence inside the uniform, because the hallways of a precinct are as loud as they are lonely. At first, I believed the law was a solid wall. If you leaned against it, you wouldn't fall. But every case showed me otherwise. The law is more like a rusted bridge. It holds, but it groans, and sometimes it collapses, dragging innocence down with it. I spent years in homicide in Detroit, a city forever on the verge of crumbling, where every corner has a ghost, and every engine backfire might be the start of a shooting. I saw too many bodies to remember names, wrote down testimonies of mothers too broken to string words together. Over time, the job stopped being just a job. It became who I was. My colleagues said I was cold, that I never let anything show. Maybe they were right. Maybe it was just armor to keep me from bleeding in front of them. What no one knew was that at home, the voices never stopped. The voices of victims, suspects, children who never had a chance. They reminded me, night after night, that justice is never clean, never complete. I drank to silence them. I ran miles at dawn to wear down my body, hoping to trick my mind. But something always slipped through, like a coin rolling under the table, just out of reach. I had a marriage once. I lost it. She said I lived more with the dead than the living, that my eyes were always fixed on something beyond the room, beyond the bed, beyond her. She wasn't wrong. I have a son, but I'm not the father I should be. On the rare weekends together, he studies me as if trying to decode who's standing there. The cop from the news, or just a tired man who forgot how to smile. That open wound is what weighs. On me most, what haunts every decision in the field, because I know one mistake from me could leave another child without a father. That shadow never leaves. I carry values that seem outdated to some. Loyalty, honor, the weight of one's word. But I also carry cracks. I've learned to negotiate with criminals like playing chess on a tilted board, knowing the pieces are never fair. I've learned to distrust even the man in the squad car next to me, because corruption seeps in like damp through old walls. And I've learned that what defines a cop isn't the weapon on his belt, but the secrets he's willing to keep buried. So when that cold coin landed in my hand, it wasn't just an object. It was as if every ghost that's trailed me all these years had finally found a key to crawl out. I knew this wasn't just another lead. It was personal, intimate, as if someone had pressed their finger straight onto the raw nerve I've spent a lifetime trying to hide. And in that moment, I felt like my whole life had been leading me to this. The phone rang at 11:47 p.m., one of those rings that already carry the weight of urgency before you even answer. I was in the kitchen, the sink full of forgotten dishes, a half-finished glass of whiskey that no longer had any effect. The voice on the radio inside my unit didn't request. It ordered, "Unit 12, we have a situation at Central Bus Terminal. Unidentified male dropped a suspicious package in a locker, Corridor 3. Partial evacuation in progress. Immediate presence requested." I didn't think. I just grabbed my jacket and holster. The keys slipped from my hand. I hit my head on the doorframe, but I didn't feel a thing. Instinct had already taken control. The drive to the terminal was a race against the sense that something larger than a package was waiting for me. The streets were slick with drizzle, that kind Detroit always seems to cry when it runs out of tears. Traffic lights blinked yellow as if asking if I really wanted to cross. The patrol car didn't speed, it slid, and every reflection of the siren in the storefront windows reminded me that every second wasted could cost dozens of lives. While I drove, my chest burned with a memory. 3 years earlier, a homemade bomb had gone off in a laundromat on the east side. I arrived 4 minutes late. 4 minutes that turned 5 bodies into statistics. I never forgave myself. And now, the moment I heard the words "suspicious package," I was thrown back into that night, as if the universe had come to collect an old debt. When I turned onto the main avenue, the terminal loomed ahead, concrete lit by pulsing red and blue, like a wounded animal struggling to breathe. People ran out carrying bags, shoving children, tripping over themselves. Chaos has its own smell: sweat, smoke, and the scorched rubber of tires skidding to sudden stops. Dispatch repeated over the radio. "Unit 12, confirm arrival. Be advised, suspect in dark coat seen leaving scene. Possible link to East Side Gang. Possible electronic device attached." Those words, electronic device, always freeze your blood. Not because it's new, but because you never know if the ground beneath you is about to vanish. When I parked in front of the terminal, my eyes caught the dashboard clock, 11:58. I thought of my son, probably asleep with the glow of his video game still humming in the dark. A part of me wanted to call, to hear his voice, but there was no time. Maybe there wouldn't be time for anything. Sergeant Ramirez was already on scene, face carved in stone. "We've got 15 lockers sealed, but witnesses pointed to 317. Suspect dropped something there and vanished into the crowd. K9 hit on it, but inconclusive. Bomb squads stuck in traffic. We need to move now." He locked eyes with me, passing the burden like a sentence. I knew it would fall on me. Then I heard it. A metallic clink, almost drowned in the noise. Something small rolling. A coin spun across the floor and stopped at my boot. And with it, a man nobody else seemed to notice, as if he were invisible in the chaos. He stepped close, pressed another coin into my hand, and said only, "It's the key." The radio erupted again with overlapping voices, frantic orders. I should have been listening, but I couldn't. The coin burned cold in my palm, heavier than any weapon, and the man vanished into the crowd before I could ask a single question, leaving me with a chilling certainty. This wasn't just another call. It wasn't only about a package. It was about me, about secrets someone else already knew, secrets I had never told. And I understood right there in the middle of the chaos. Opening that locker wasn't just answering a call. It was stepping into something that would change my life forever. The terminal felt alive with fear. The moment I crossed the yellow tape and stepped inside the main hall, the air grew heavier, thick with sweat, exhaust fumes, and the metallic sting of wet steel bars dripping rainwater from the stampede of boots that had fled moments earlier. The place, usually bursting with voices, announcements, and the growl of engines, had collapsed into a silence broken only by distant shouts and the echo of sirens outside. It was as if the heart of the city had stopped beating, waiting to see if it would survive. Fluorescent lights flickered, casting quick shadows that gave shape to things that weren't really there. My eyes scanned in circles, every reflection on glass a potential threat, every forgotten suitcase a possible bomb. In the corner, a tipped-over janitor's cart spilled chemicals across the floor, pooling into puddles that mirrored the flashing emergency exits. It felt like standing on a stage, where every prop had been set for a bloody finale. The coin burned cold in my hand. I traced its worn surface with my thumb, the grooves too deliberate to be random. It didn't make sense, but deep down, I knew nothing tonight would. Locker 317 was only 20 meters away. 20 meters that felt like a minefield. I moved slowly, each footstep echoing too loud. Ramirez followed 3 paces behind, weapon drawn, eyes sweeping the room. "I don't like this," he muttered, and his voice sounded more like a prayer than a warning. Neither did I. What gnawed at me wasn't the danger, but the calm. The chaos had stopped too suddenly, and when a crowded place turns silent like this, it means something worse is about to happen. A torn backpack caught my eye on a bench near the corridor. Inside, crumpled papers, a child's photo with singed corners, a lone, worn-out sneaker. No explosives, just fragments of someone's life scattered like breadcrumbs. But the sight hit me hard. Everything about this scene felt choreographed, like someone wanted me distracted. Closer now, I saw fresh handprints smudged in the dust on the locker door. Someone had been there minutes ago. The metal still held the warmth of human touch. I crouched and noticed fine scratches around the lock, like they'd been carved with a blade. Not forced entry, symbols, almost a signature. I didn't recognize them, yet they stirred something unsettlingly familiar, like echoes of a memory I couldn't place. Then a sharp metallic sound snapped across the hall. A soda can rolling, kicked by no one, bouncing until it stopped right at my boot. My pulse spiked. Ramirez spun, weapon raised toward the void. "Who's there?" he barked. Silence answered. A silence thick enough to cut. This wasn't random. Every detail, the backpack, the markings, the rolling can, was part of a puzzle, a trap carefully laid. And I was the piece someone wanted in the center. My breathing slowed, focus narrowing onto the locker. The coin seemed to tug at my hand, urging me toward the lock. A chill raced down my spine as I aligned it with the slot. I wasn't just about to open a compartment. I was about to expose something meant for me alone. I hesitated, glanced back. Ramirez stood steady, weapon ready, but his eyes asked what his mouth didn't. "Are you sure?" I didn't answer. The truth was, I'd never been sure of anything in my life. But standing before Locker 317, every choice, every failure, every loss felt like it had led me here. And the first impression the place carved into me was sharp as a blade. I wasn't just investigating a crime. I was being invited into a game that had started long before I arrived. And every inch of this scene screamed the same thing. There was no way I'd walk out of here whole. I drew, in a slow breath, trying to control the sound of it echoing too loud in the silence of the terminal. Ramirez gave me a nod, his way of saying go ahead, though I knew it was less an order and more surrender. Nobody wanted to be the first to open that damned locker. The coin felt heavier than ever, cold, but pulsing with a strange life of its own. My throat tightened as I slid it into the slot. It turned. A metallic click cracked through the corridor like a gunshot. Time froze. Every muscle in my body braced for the explosion that never came. Instead, the locker cracked open just enough to release a stench of scorched paper mixed with rust. Ramirez held his breath behind me. "Easy," he whispered, voice trembling. My hand pulled the door wider. Inside, the brown envelope stared back at me, bound in a black band, the flash drive taped to the motel key. But before I could process it, a shot ripped through the air. The sharp crack of a bullet from the far side of the terminal. The round struck the tiled wall, ricocheted, and blew out a light above us. The hall plunged into strobing half-darkness, lit only by the stutter of failing fluorescence. "Cover!" Ramirez shouted, dragging me behind a concrete pillar. My pulse hammered, every beat louder than the gunfire. Another shot, then two more. Not warning shots. Someone was testing us, boxing us in. The coin almost slipped from my sweat-soaked palm, its metallic edge slick. Losing it would have betrayed us with a single clang, but instinct saved it. I clutched it like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. Adrenaline surged, narrowing my vision. Ramirez scanned the shadows, muzzle sweeping the emptiness, but I knew this wasn't a direct assault. It was a distraction. Whoever was out there wanted my attention pulled from the locker, which meant whatever was inside was worth more than bullets. "Cover right!" I yelled, crouch running down the corridor, using abandoned luggage as barricades. Shards of broken glass crunched beneath my boots. Sirens bled in faintly from outside, the radio on my shoulder fizzing with static and overlapping orders. I switched it off. I needed silence in my head, or I'd die with noise drowning me. Another volley, this one closer. Dust sprayed as rounds tore chunks from the pillar inches from my face. Concrete fragments burned into my skin. Rolling to the side, I caught sight of a shadow darting between benches toward the exit. A hooded figure moving with the precision of someone trained. The gun glinted in his hand as the flicker of light caught it. I had the shot, but something inside me froze my trigger finger. Not fear, intuition. It wasn't the time. The scene itself told me to wait. Ramirez fired twice, forcing the shadow back. The figure vanished into the dark, boots thundering over wet tile. Then silence again, heavier than before, the kind that swallows you whole. I bolted back to the locker, chest heaving as if I'd sprinted miles. The envelope remained, but something had changed. A phone inside vibrated, its muffled tone like a heartbeat trapped in a box. My stomach flipped. Ramirez shook his head, eyes begging me not to answer. I already knew I couldn't ignore it. I yanked it out, flipped it open. "Dad, run!" The voice was fragile but unmistakable. My son. My body turned to stone. My throat locked. Ramirez stared at me, confusion tightening his face. He didn't understand why I'd gone pale. I had no time to explain. Because right then, behind me, the distinct sound of a hammer cocking filled the air, cold steel pressing against the back of my skull. That was the moment I realized the action wasn't escalating anymore. It was swallowing me whole. The cold pressure of the gun barrel against the back of my head froze me in place for what felt like an eternity. Ramirez raised his weapon instantly, but a harsh voice cut through the dark. "Drop it, or he dies now." That tone wasn't desperation, wasn't the frantic edge of a junkie cornered. It was steady, calculated, trained. I obeyed, slowly raising my hands, the phone still vibrating in my grip. On the line, my son's voice cracked again. "Dad, run!" Before the call cut to silence. The man leaned close, his breath sour and hot against my ear. "You should have never opened that locker." His words landed like a verdict. Disappointment rather than hatred. Ramirez stayed frozen, finger taut on the trigger, but he had no clean shot. One wrong move and I'd be a corpse on the tiles. The coin slipped from my sweaty palm, clattering across the floor until it rolled to the stranger's feet. His eyes dropped to it, and for the first time he faltered. His breath quickened. The coin had more power over him than the weapon pressed to my skull. He crouched, pinched it between his fingers like a relic, whispering, "So it's true." That's when I saw his face under the hood. A jagged scar carved across his left brow, eyes like storm clouds. My gut collapsed. I knew that face. Not personally, but from old files, grainy photos buried in dusty reports, whispered stories in precinct hallways. His name was etched into sealed cases. Government ops hushed and never tried. He wasn't just anyone. He had once worn the same badge I did. Worse, he had been my father's partner on missions I was never supposed to know existed. Ramirez muttered, "Who the hell is this guy?" But I already knew. He was the man last seen with my father on the trip he never returned from. If he was alive, armed and holding that coin like scripture, then my father's so-called accident had been a lie all along. Shock pulsed through me so hard I barely noticed when he shoved the envelope into my chest. "If you want answers, You'll have to choose between the truth and your son's life. My hands shook as I pulled the strap free. Inside was a stack of old photos, all marked with dates from the year my father vanished. Warehouses, deserted highways, abandoned trucks. In several, my father stood beside. This man. It hadn't been an accident. It had been a mission. At the bottom was one last photo, recent, shot through a surveillance lens. My son, leaving school, backpack slung over his shoulder, oblivious. Scrawled underneath in jagged handwriting, "Bloodline." I felt the floor tilt beneath me. Ramirez edged closer, but the man snapped the hammer back and barked, "Don't move!" The echo cracked across the empty terminal. My lungs burned, every breath jagged. My mind clawed at the puzzle. My father. This man, the coin, the staged accident, and now my boy caught in the web. "Why?" The word rasped out of me. He didn't blink. "Because you carry his blood. What began with your father ends with you." Ramirez fired. The gunshot cracked, but the scarred man melted back into the shadows before the bullet found him. He vanished, leaving me with the scattered photos soaking in the damp floor and the weight of truths I never asked for. And in the silence after the shot, I finally understood. The real enemy wasn't just out there in the dark. He lived in my history, in my bloodline. And worst of all, he had my son. I was still on my knees against the cold floor of the terminal, the torn envelope in front of me, the photos scattered like shards of a puzzle I never wanted to solve. Ramirez's gunshot still rang in my ears, but the silence that followed was louder, heavier. The man had vanished back into the dark, leaving nothing behind but his words. "What began with your father ends with you." My chest burned with a storm of rage, fear, and disbelief. The life I thought I knew, my father's life, my own, collapsed in seconds. My father hadn't been just a truck driver. His death hadn't been an accident, and now my son was a pawn in the same twisted game. The stranger wasn't a stranger at all. He was the living proof that everything I'd believed about my family was a carefully staged lie. A cop's mind is trained to separate fact from illusion, to build cases on logic, not emotion. But in that moment, I wasn't just a cop. I was a father staring into an abyss, torn between the professional discipline that kept me alive and the primal desperation to save my child at any cost. The badge on my chest screamed at me to keep my head. The blood in my veins screamed louder. Move, fight, burn the world if you have to. I closed my eyes and the memories hit hard. My boy at 5 years old running across the yard with a ball, calling for me to play, his eyes searching mine on our last. Weekend together, trying to understand if I was the man from the news or just a broken father who'd forgotten how to smile. And now that frail voice over the phone, "Dad, run." It wasn't just a plea, it was faith. Faith that I would come, faith stronger than my own. Inside me, two forces clashed. The cop, hardened by years of homicides, trained to swallow fear, to wait for backup, to trust procedure. And the father, scarred by absence, racked with guilt, terrified of failing again. The cop said, "Slow down, think, follow the trail, use the evidence, don't let anger cloud you." The father roared back, "There is no time. Every second he's further away. Go now or lose him forever." Ramirez crouched beside me, his hand gripping my shoulder. His voice tried to drag me back. "Look at me, breathe. If you lose your head now, we lose everything." But he didn't know what it meant to hear your own child's voice through static, begging for you. He couldn't feel the knife twisting inside me, the knowledge that the past had already stolen my father, and if I hesitated now, it would steal my son too. The anger rose, sharp and hot. Anger at the lies I'd lived with, at my father, who had never been the man he claimed, at the scarred ghost who now used my boy as leverage, but most of all at myself, for not seeing it, for not protecting him, for being too late. I knew anger could blind me, but I also knew it was the only fire left to keep me moving. The dilemma was brutal. Give in to instinct and risk turning this into a massacre, or cling to discipline and risk arriving too late. Both roads led to loss. Both roads would scar me forever. I rose slowly, fists tightening around the scattered photos. Ramirez's eyes locked on mine, waiting for me to call the next step. But how do you decide when every choice feels like stepping into the abyss? My breathing slowed, though the storm inside didn't. The cop in me whispered that the photos, the flash drive, the motel key were clues, pieces of a labyrinth I could solve if I kept my mind steady. But the father in me shouted louder. There was no time for puzzles. My son was out there, scared, waiting, and in that moment the truth carved itself into me like a wound. Whatever choice I made, I would bleed for it, and I didn't know if I had the strength to survive the cost. The terminal clock read 12:21 a.m. When I finally understood, there was no more room for hesitation. Time had become my enemy, and every second was a knife twisting deeper. My son's breath running out somewhere I couldn't see. Ramirez kept pushing for protocol. Call in reinforcements, wait for the bomb squad, set up a perimeter. He wasn't wrong. He was speaking like a cop. But the father inside me couldn't breathe under that logic. This wasn't about patience. It was about blood. I pulled the flash drive from the locker, the motel key still taped to it, and gripped them like they were verdicts in my hand. Photos lay scattered on the wet floor, accusing me with every face, every scene. My father, standing beside the scarred man. My son, photographed through a surveillance lens, marked as bloodline. I could pretend this was just another case, follow procedure and bureaucracy, but that would mean handing my son over to the same darkness that swallowed my father. Ramirez's hand clamped down on my shoulder. Think, partner. Don't let him bait you. This guy isn't just a criminal. He knows our playbook. If you rush in, he'll use the kid. Against you? His words made sense, but they sounded far away, muffled, like a radio station cutting in and out. The only thing I heard clearly was my son's whisper on the phone. Dad, run. Not just a plea, a command. A reminder that he believed in me more than I did. And that's when the choice crystallized. It wasn't about whether to act or wait. It was about who I was willing to be. The perfect cop, bound by rules, or the father who would burn the world to save his boy. There was no middle ground anymore. I steadied my breath and told Ramirez, I'm going after him, now, with or without you. The shock on his face hardened into anger. You're insane. That's suicide. Maybe it was, but for the first time in years, I wasn't wavering. I tucked the flash drive into my vest, clenched the motel key in my hand. Highway 19, room 22. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a map or an ambush. Maybe both. Either way, it was all I had. The decision hit me like a hammer. I would walk into that room. I would face whatever waited there, because the only thing worse than dying was living with the question of what happened to my son. Ramirez cursed under his breath, then said, If you're going, I'm going. His voice was sharp, but beneath it I heard loyalty, the kind that defies orders. I didn't thank him. There was no time. Outside, rain thickened, drenching the asphalt, turning the city lights into blurred streaks of red and blue. Each drop felt like a warning, a countdown, but the decision was carved in stone now. I climbed behind the wheel, the engine rumbling like a war drum. Ramirez slammed his door shut, the radio hissing with commands we ignored. In the rearview mirror, my own reflection stared back at me. I didn't see just a cop. I didn't see just a father. I saw a man standing on the edge, ready to cross a line with no return. The wipers smeared rain across the glass, clearing the view just long enough for me to see the highway stretching ahead like a vein of black fire. My hands tightened on the wheel. Whatever waited at that motel, I would face it, because my son was out there, waiting. And that night, I swore I'd bring him back, or I'd die trying. The choice I made tore the ground open beneath me, and the consequences came fast, like falling dominoes. As soon as Ramirez and I turned onto Highway 19, a message cut through the radio. Unit 12, return immediately. Direct order from the captain. I pressed my thumb to the dial and killed the feed, but the order had already spread through the precinct like wildfire. Within minutes, the department was a hive of voices, questions, accusations. Back at headquarters, they didn't waste time. The captain's stare was sharp, jaw locked tight. dark circles deepening under his eyes. Did you have any idea what you were doing? Not a question. A sentence waiting to be signed. I laid it all out. The envelope, the photo of my son, the voice on the phone. He barely listened. To him, the issue wasn't my son's life. It was my defiance. The hammer fell quickly. My operational clearance was suspended. My access to key databases revoked. My weapon checked and logged like I couldn't be trusted with it. And worst of all, my son's name was pulled into a protective custody protocol that cut me out of the loop. Bureaucracy, locking me away from the very person I was bleeding to save. In the halls, whispers spread. Some colleagues looked at me with pity, others with judgment. I could feel it in every nod, every sideways glance. They thought I'd crossed the line, and maybe I had. The media was merciless. Cop goes rogue in terminal incident. Headlines carved me into either a reckless cowboy or a tragic father. Commentators debated whether I was a disgrace or a martyr. The city I'd sworn to protect turned me into a distorted mirror, each person seeing only the version that fit their story. And while the world argued about me, the one thing that mattered, my son, remained out of reach. Even within the unit, cracks showed. Ramirez stayed by my side, but I saw the weight in his eyes, the knowledge that I'd dragged him into the same fire. Some veterans called me quietly, promising help if I needed it. Others warned me bluntly, if this is a setup, you're finished. You'll take us all down with you. The fallout bled into my personal life. My ex-wife's phone started ringing with reporters fishing for sound bites. Friends I trusted pulled back, afraid to be caught in the undertow of my choices. And my son, if he was safe, he was now under scrutiny, forced into interviews with psychologists, his every move cataloged as evidence. The guilt of that crushed me more than any suspension or headline, but the harshest consequence came from inside. I realized that by choosing to put my son above procedure, I had burned the very bridge that gave me power, the institution itself. Every advantage I once had as a cop, resources, intel, backup, was either locked or compromised. I had stripped myself down to one man, with no shield but his will, and yet deep inside, there was no regret. The system had always taught me that every choice carried a price. This was mine. I'd pay it in full. The only question was in what currency. My career, my freedom, maybe even my life. Because some debts aren't measured in rules. They're measured in blood. The night stretched on without end. I sat in the car parked outside the old Highway 19 motel, the key to room 22 heavy in my pocket, burning like a beacon. Ramirez rested in the passenger seat, eyes closed, but I knew he wasn't asleep, just trying to steady himself, to piece together the chaos we'd been dragged into. I couldn't. My chest was a storm that wouldn't quiet. Then the phone buzzed, an unlisted number. I answered. Silence. Heavy, deliberate. Then breathing. Deep, steady, controlled. And finally his voice, the scarred man. You crossed the line, son. And you know what happens when someone crosses the line? There's no going back. His tone wasn't angry. It was almost paternal, which sickened me. Where's my boy? I snapped. He ignored the question. Listen first. Then the sound shifted. A muffled sob. A child's voice, small and breaking. Dad. My heart ripped open. It was him, my son. He's alive, for now, the scarred man continued. But don't think you can save him with guns and badges. You still don't understand, do you? Your father knew. He made the same choice you're about to. And he failed. Paid with his life. Now it's your turn to prove whether his blood runs weak or strong. My hands trembled with fury and helplessness. I wanted to scream, but I forced myself to hold it down. He wanted me unbalanced. If I lost control, I lost everything. You're going to tell me where he is, I said, my voice low, sharp. A laugh rattled through the speaker, cold, humorless. You already have the answers, the drive, the room, the coin. They're not riddles, they're choices. Will you give up your badge to embrace what's inside you? Will you finish what your father abandoned? Silence followed. And then, faint, my son again. Dad, don't give up on me. Something shifted inside me. It wasn't just rage, wasn't just fear. It was clarity. The scarred man wanted me to inherit my father's sins, to be trapped in a cycle written before I was born. But my son's voice reminded me I had another option. I could break it. "You're wrong," I said, steadier than I felt. "I'm not my father. I won't repeat his mistakes. And you don't get to tell me who I am. I've already decided." For the first time, silence on his end. Then a sigh, heavy and almost disappointed. "We'll see." The line went dead. I sat there with the phone pressed to my ear, pulse pounding. Ramirez opened his eyes, studying me. "What happened?" I told him every word. He leaned back, shaking his head. "Then it's not just about ransom. He's trying to recruit you. That changes everything." I put the car in gear, rain streaking across the windshield. The conversation hadn't just been a threat. It had been an invitation into a labyrinth that began long before me. But hearing my son's voice, hearing his faith in me, it anchored me. This wasn't about my father's legacy anymore. It was about the future I wanted my son to have. And I knew then, whatever the cost, I'd pay it. Because he was the only truth I had left. The road to dawn felt endless. Ramirez finally drifted into real sleep beside me, his head against the window. But I didn't close my eyes once. Something inside me had shifted. Something irreversible. That phone call with the scarred man, hearing my father's ghost echoed through another voice, had ripped open a wound. But instead of paralyzing me, it changed me. For the first time in years, I wasn't just reacting. I was seeing myself clearly, who I had become and who I needed to be. All my life, I thought the job was about drawing lines, right and wrong, innocent and guilty, living and dead. But tonight showed me those lines were never straight. My father wasn't the man I worshipped, but neither was he only the traitor I'd been told about. He had made choices, dark ones, and now I was left with the fallout. The question was brutal. Was I destined to make the same ones? Asphalt blurred beneath the tires and guilt replayed in my head like an endless reel. My son's birthday I missed because of a crime scene. The nights I silenced his calls, convincing myself I was too tired. The lies I told myself, saying I was protecting him by working harder. The truth hit like a blade. I'd been hiding behind the badge, pretending that being a good cop excused being a bad father, and now, with his life on the line, I saw it plain. I'd been a coward where it mattered most. That realization hurt more than any bullet ever could, because I understood then. The inheritance my son carried wasn't my father's blood. It was me, my absence, my failures, my silence. But in that same darkness, something sparked, a chance. If I chose differently now, if I fought not just for his life but for his trust, I could shatter the cycle. He didn't need a perfect cop. He didn't need a flawless hero. He needed a father who refused to leave him behind. I glanced at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes looked hollow, scarred by years of death and betrayal. But for once, I didn't just see exhaustion. I saw purpose. I didn't need to be my father. I didn't need to be the department's ideal soldier. I needed to be a man my son could look at and say, he came for me. He didn't give up. That's what transformation meant. It wasn't about solving the case or dismantling conspiracies. It was about choosing love over fear, presence over excuses. It was about proving to my boy and to myself that I still had something human left inside this armor I'd built. The horizon cracked open with red and gold as we neared the motel. Morning light spilled across the windshield, a reminder that even the longest nights end. Each mile brought with it a promise. I wouldn't leave without him. But it wasn't just about rescue anymore. It was about redemption. Strange, how something as small as a coin could unravel everything. But maybe that was the point. Symbols force you to face what you bury. That coin wasn't just the key to a locker. It was the key to my own reflection, forcing me to confront the truth I'd avoided. I didn't know if I'd survive what was coming. I might lose the badge, my freedom, even my life. But for the first time, I understood that none of it mattered compared to one thing: my son knowing, without a shadow of doubt, that his father fought for him. If this was to be my last case, then let it be the moment I stopped being a shadow of the past and finally became the father my son deserved. Room 22 at the old Highway 19 motel stood before me like the mouth of a tunnel carved out of darkness. The key twisted in the lock with a metallic snap that echoed louder than any siren. Ramirez was at my back, gun raised, eyes fixed on me as if he wasn't sure whether to protect me or stop me. I pushed the door open slowly. The stench hit first, mildew and stale cigarette smoke, followed by the low hiss of a television left on static. Every step I took sank into the worn carpet, each creak of the floorboard sounding like the room itself was breathing. At the center, under the glow of a single dangling bulb, sat a metal chair. On it, not my son, but a laptop, open and waiting. Its screen flickered with a live video call, and then his face filled the frame. The scarred man. Behind him, bound and frightened, was my boy. His eyes were red from tears, but he was alive. My heart pounded so violently I thought it might burst through my chest. "You made it!" The scarred man's voice rasped through the speakers. "Better than I expected. Now comes the final choice. Open the file on that laptop. Take the legacy your father left, or the boy doesn't go home." Ramirez tensed, stepping forward, but I lifted a hand to stop him. This was mine. I approached the screen, the coin pressing like ice in my pocket. On the laptop was a single file, its name blinking like a dare. Legacy. My fingers hovered, shaking. Opening it meant unleashing secrets that could tear apart institutions, burn lives to ash. Refusing meant risking my son's life. My throat closed, my pulse thundered. Then I looked at him, my son, trying to be brave with ropes biting into his wrists. His eyes locked on mine, pleading not only for rescue but for something deeper, for me to be different, for me not to let the past dictate who I was. I pulled out the coin, pressing it against the laptop screen. The gesture steadied me. "I won't open your file," I said. My voice cracked, but held. "You can kill me, destroy my career, erase everything, but you won't make me into what my father became. I don't carry his legacy, I carry mine." Ramirez stared like I'd lost my mind, but I didn't waver. For a moment, silence stretched. Then the scarred man exhaled, a sound that was half laugh, half sigh. "You broke the cycle," he said, almost amused. The call cut to black. A door slammed open at the far side of the motel. We rushed outside. There, my son, tied up but unharmed, dumped in the back seat of an abandoned car. I sprinted, tearing at the knots, pulling him into my arms. He clung to me, sobbing, whispering over and over, "I knew you'd come." Red and blue lights filled the lot minutes later. Officers swarmed, protocols resumed, reports began. But the scarred man was gone, vanished like smoke. All that remained was the dead laptop and the echo of his words. On paper, the case was closed. Kidnapping, motive unclear. But I knew better. This wasn't just a crime, it was a reckoning with the ghosts of my bloodline. And by refusing to open that file, I'd chosen ignorance over answers. Those secrets would haunt me forever. Yet holding my son, feeling the weight and warmth of him alive in my arms, I understood something. I hadn't lost. I'd won the only battle that mattered. The sun broke across the cracked motel parking lot, and I realized the operation was technically over. But inside, the case would never be, because some coins never stop weighing you down, even when you choose not to spend them. The sun was already high when we finally left the motel behind. The world outside looked untouched, indifferent to what had just happened. Cars moved, people hurried along sidewalks, the city marched on as if nothing had changed. But inside me, everything had. The coin sat heavy in my pocket, cold and silent, a reminder that some symbols never vanish. I could throw it away, bury it, pretend it had never existed. But I knew better. It represented more than metal. It was proof that choices shape destinies, and while the past can try to bind us, it doesn't have the right to condemn us. Back at the precinct, the captain's stare was sharp, his words sharper. Endless questions, reports, closed-door meetings. Some called me reckless, others brave. They dissected every second of my actions like surgeons cutting open a body to find where it bled. To the department, I was walking a razor's edge, too human to be the perfect cop, too relentless to be controlled. But none of that mattered, because across the waiting room sat my son, wrapped in a blanket, eyes swollen, body trembling, but alive. That look in his eyes taught me more than years of cases, more than the academy, more than any law etched in paper. He didn't want a flawless hero. He didn't need an unshakable officer. He needed a father who would stay, who would not surrender, who would not vanish. And for the first time, I saw with brutal clarity the greatest investigation of my life was never about crime scenes, suspects, or conspiracies. It was about me, about breaking a cycle that began with my father and almost consumed me whole. I learned the badge is heavy, but absence weighs more. That saving lives means nothing if you lose the ability to live your own. That chasing the truth demands courage, but facing yourself demands more. And that, in the end, it isn't the shield on your chest that defines you. It's the choices you make when everything is on the line. My father chose silence. I chose rupture. And looking into my son's eyes, I understood that was the true victory. To prove we can write new stories, even when the past tries to chain us. The job had taught me that justice is imperfect, that monsters slip through cracks, that ghosts often walk free. But that day, I discovered something else, that love and presence carry more force than any revelation buried in secret files. Now, when I hold the coin, I don't see a key to a locker. I see proof that I had a choice, and that for once, I chose right. The scarred man may still be out there, hidden in the dark, but he didn't win. He didn't twist me into my father's reflection. He didn't steal who I was. And if my son ever asks what really happened that night, I'll tell him the truth. That the danger was real, the threat was close, but that his voice gave me the strength not to lose myself. Because the greatest lesson I learned is simple, but unshakable. We don't inherit destinies. We inherit the chance to choose. Now I move forward. I don't know when or if that man will return. I don't know how many battles are left, but I know this. I will never walk into the dark alone again. Not with my son at my side. Not with the weight of that choice anchoring me. And to you, who stayed with me through this story, I leave a request. Subscribe to the channel and share in the comments which part struck you the most. Because these aren't just stories about cops or crimes or secrets. They're stories about us, about choices, about courage to break the cycles that bind us. And maybe in the end, that's the only investigation that truly matters.